My boyfriend's unexpected reaction to my night out unraveled our relationship. It's strange how a single night can alter the course of your life. How a few hours can lay bare the fractures in a relationship you once thought unbreakable. I never imagined that one innocent night out with my friends would lead to the unraveling of the relationship I had invested so much of myself into. But as it turns out, I didn't know him as well as I thought I did. We'd been together for nearly 3 years. My boyfriend and I used to think of him as my anchor. The person who kept me grounded. Our connection felt deep and genuine, built on shared laughter, shared struggles, and what I thought was mutual respect. But I've come to understand that sometimes the people you trust the most are the ones capable of hurting you in ways you never expected. It all started one Friday night. A few weeks ago, I'd planned a casual evening out with my friends. Something I rarely did, between work and life's general chaos. Nights like these were precious. A reminder of a life outside of the routines that sometimes felt like they defined me. I'd told him about it days in advance, wanting to be clear, not because I felt like I needed permission but because I believed in open communication. He had seemed fine with it, even encouraging. Have fun, he'd said with a smile that now seems almost hollow. So, I went out that night, laughing and chatting with friends, feeling like myself in a way I hadn't in a long time. We stayed out a little later than expected, the night slipping away in waves of joy and memories shared. I didn't check my phone as often as I should have, something I regretted later, but for a few blissful hours, I forgot about everything else, caught up in the moment. When I finally returned home, there was a heaviness in the air that I couldn't quite place. My boyfriend was distant, colder than I'd ever seen him. He didn't say much, just gave me a look that felt loaded with things unspoken. I could sense his anger simmering beneath the surface. But he brushed off my concerns, telling me he was just tired. I believed him, or at least I tried to. I didn't want to start a fight. Didn't want to let this one night cast a shadow over everything else. I hoped that by the morning, things would be back to normal. But they weren't. Instead, a strange tension settled into our lives. An uneasiness that grew with each passing day. He began to act differently. His responses clipped, his affection replaced with a kind of calculated distance. He would go out suddenly, leaving without saying where he was going or when he'd be back. His phone, once left casually around the apartment, was now glued to him, locked with a new password. He began posting cryptic messages on social media, things I couldn't quite decipher but felt were meant to sting. They were small things, little actions that felt insignificant on their own but together wove a pattern I couldn't ignore. It didn't take long for me to realize he was retaliating, punishing me in his own silent way. I could feel the resentment building, twisting its way into the cracks of our relationship. But he wouldn't talk about it, wouldn't admit that anything was wrong. He'd act as if everything was normal, even as his actions told a different story. I'd catch him looking at me with a strange glint in his eyes. A satisfaction that sent a chill down my spine. It was as if he enjoyed watching me struggle, watching me try to piece together the puzzle of his behavior. One night, as I was scrolling through social media, I stumbled upon something that made my stomach drop. A photo of him out with a group of people, among them a girl I didn't recognize, her smile wide as she leaned a little too close to him. They looked comfortable, familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. I'd asked him about her, trying to keep my voice steady, hoping he'd reassure me, but instead, he just shrugged, dismissing it as a friend from work. His response was nonchalant, almost daring me to question it further. Days turned into weeks, and his behavior only became more erratic. He'd go out more frequently, coming back in the early hours with a smug look that he didn't bother to hide. He'd leave traces of his nights out, little clues that he knew I'd find a lingering perfume on his clothes. Receipts from places we'd never been together. Small signs that spoke louder than any confession. I felt like I was losing my grip, spiraling into a cycle of suspicion and self-doubt. Part of me wanted to confront him, to demand answers, to force him to admit what he was doing. But another part of me was terrified. Afraid that confronting him would mean facing the reality I wasn't ready to accept. I started questioning myself, wondering if I'd done something to deserve this. If my one night out had somehow justified the way he was treating me. The worst part was the isolation. He knew exactly how to distance me from others without lifting a finger. I started to withdraw from friends. Embarrassed to share what was happening. Ashamed that I'd allowed myself to be pulled into this twisted dynamic. The few friends who noticed the change in me asked questions. Their concern evident, but I brushed them off. Too proud to admit the truth. One night, I finally reached a breaking point. He had left again without a word, disappearing into the night as he had so many times before. I sat alone in the apartment, the silence pressing down on me, amplifying every fear and doubt that had been gnawing at me. I felt a wave of anger, a surge of frustration that made me feel like I was suffocating. I couldn't keep pretending that this was normal, that his behavior was something I could ignore. I took a deep breath and started looking through our past messages, searching for any signs I might have missed, any indication that things had been unraveling long before that night out. As I scrolled, I saw the way he had subtly chipped away at me over time. His small criticisms disguised as jokes, his jealousy masked as concern. It was as if I were finally seeing the truth laid bare. The pieces of his manipulation fitting together with a clarity that left me shaken. When he returned, I was waiting. I didn't confront him with anger or accusations. Instead, I spoke calmly, asking him why he had changed, why he felt the need to punish me for something so trivial. He didn't respond, just looked at me with that same cold satisfaction, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. And in that moment, I understood that he wouldn't change, that he enjoyed having control over me, over my emotions, over my sense of self. I realized that this relationship had been hollow long before that night out. That his affection had always been conditional, based on his need to control and manipulate. The truth hit me with a force that left me breathless. I had lost myself in a relationship that had never truly been built on love, but on power and control. That night, I made a decision. I would not let him continue to define my life, to keep me trapped in a cycle of doubt and fear. I gathered the strength I hadn't realized I had. The resolve to walk away from a relationship that had slowly drained me of my confidence, my joy, my sense of self. Leaving wasn't easy. I knew he would try to make it difficult, that he would play on my insecurities, my fears, but I also knew that I deserved more than a life spent walking on eggshells, constantly questioning my worth, my decisions. I packed my things and left, stepping out of the apartment and into a world that felt strange and new, but filled with the freedom I'd long forgotten. In the months that followed, I rebuilt my life piece by piece, learning to trust myself again, to rediscover the parts of me I'd buried beneath his influence. It wasn't an easy journey, and there were moments when I doubted my choice, moments when I felt the weight of loneliness pressing down on me. But each day, I grew a little stronger, a little more sure of who I was without him. Now, looking back, I see that night out for what it truly was: a catalyst. A turning point that forced me to confront the reality I'd been avoiding. It was painful, yes, but it was also the beginning of a new chapter. One where I learned to value myself, to seek relationships built on trust and respect, rather than control and manipulation. I may have lost a relationship, but I gained something far more valuable: a sense of self-worth. A resilience that has carried me through the darkest of times. And for that, I am grateful.